With genetic modification to seeds and fruits in general, are we losing the goodness that had been created by the Lord in these foods?
Well, there may be a certain amount of degradation in the goodness through genetic modification, I would think, but I think probably the biggest influencer of that is the changes in the nutrients in the soils that's available to the plant to use. So it's known that some of the trace elements in some of the crops around the place, for example, are on the decline. So we don't get some of those trace elements that we need in our bodies through the foods that we're eating. I don't know about the genetic modification so much. Maybe Diane might have a little bit to say about that.
Craig, I think it's a combination, because it's also our bodies are breaking down, our bodies are changing and are not able to assimilate a lot of them. I mean, one of the latest is that people are going on to gluten-free diets, and they're claiming that, well, the breeders are breeding more gluten in the wheat, but find that the gluten contents are the same, but our bodies are having trouble assimilating. So, I do think plants, it's a fall. The plants are subject to the curse as well. And there's surely genetic modification to the seeds and the fruits, but there also is to us and our ability to digest them and assimilate them. So, it's all
there's
the fall.
Pretty sure that's a good line to take, Glenn, because I remember we in third year genetics, we were studying plant modification by genetic modification and some of the factors that influence it. And a rather famous discovery made in Australia was that if you were a farmer, how come you always had good clover growing under the power lines? And they discovered that was because a tiny amount of copper would wash out of the power lines, and if it landed on the ground, the plants thrived, right? So it's a minor element in the plants, but without that, the plants don't do anywhere near as well. So it's not just genetic modification, it's the degradation of the soils as well, the degradation of the climate, and we've been suffering that for a long time. Particularly, it's getting worse towards the present. But that sort of adding trace elements has certainly improved a lot of things. But at the other end, you have the people growing wheat or rice, particularly is a classic study where you grew the rice so you double the size of the head and think you're improving the world's food resources. And the reality is you always pay a price for genetic modification. So those of you into genetics, always look at, if I double the size of the stalk, what happens to the size of the flower? If I double the size of the head, what happens to the quality of the plant? We're not as clever as God. It would be nice if we were, but we aren't. And just remember one thing, when it comes to food, God is the creator of it all, blood included. And he has the right to tell us whether we can or we can't eat anything. I say that as a Mackay whose family has had blood in their diet for a long time. I still remember a long-running argument I had with one lovely Scottish Christian who loved her black pudding. And I just sort of gently, because I used to stay with her on ministry, had to gently bring up the subject that, listen, here's what God's rule is from Noah to the present. Here it is repeated in the book of Acts. And in the end, I'm glad to say she finally conceded that God has the right to tell me whether I can eat blood or not. And the point that Sam made is a really important one. His rule there is associated with the fact that the wages of sin is death. The life is in the blood. So if you are dead, you need new blood. Hence, Christ died on the cross so that his blood shed could become new life for us. So really good point there, Sam. And we must keep that connection very, very clear. It's not just food and facts. Diane, you got anything else to add on that one?
I think we've covered most of the issues there. But the key point there is we're not as smart as God. So we need to study what God has made in order to make the most of it.